How are you doing, Internet? I'm B-Nuts, and today we'll be taking a look and reviewing at Five Nights at Freddy's, The Fourth Closet, the third novel in Scott Cawthon's novel series for FNAF. And spoiler warning for this, if you haven't read The Silver Eyes, The Twisted Ones, and also this before now, you really should, because I'm going to get into details here in this review. I'm going to have to in order to analyze the way that it's written. But this is The Fourth Closet. I use mine mostly to store whatever I can't fit in my shelves and drawers. Clothes, movies that I get from the library, models that I can't store on my shelves. And yes, I did get this book at the Vaughan Public Libraries. You can also check it out from your local library if you like. Now, as to how well this is written, what it's supposed to do, Scott did say that this is alternate canon. It's not supposed to be the definitive FNAF experience, according to what he said in his recent interview with Daco. It's supposed to be a more streamlined story, and it's supposed to straighten things out. Does it do that? To an extent. And it is interesting to see all the different things that are in here or aren't in here from the games. There are different details in it that are included and other stuff that are omitted simply because Scott determined that there are certain things that would or would not contribute to the story and the reader's understanding of the story. And you have to understand that not everything can be included in order to make sense. In fact, it was the mix of all the different details, all of the different elements within the games that made them, when taken together, not really make a whole lot of sense. And to that extent, Scott kept responding to the criticisms to his games by changing things up for the next game, again, according to his interview with Daco. And as to The Fourth Closet, yes, the title is relevant as they have always been. What he manages to do is to tell a story that, while it has some inconsistencies and plot contrivances, it's still fairly cohesive. Bed sheets, linens, and a vacuum hose. As far as the inconsistencies that I mentioned before, there are certain behaviors that aren't accounted for from early on in the books. And I think that when Scott started this book, along with Kira Breed-Brisley, he had one plan in mind, and that plan likely changed over time, especially once you consider Sister Location and Pizzeria Simulator. Things really changed when those games came along, and Scott didn't have a solid plan from start to finish. He kept on changing things. He kept on adapting things to people's criticisms and feedback that he was getting. And it's not every creator who will be able to do that, but Scott tried his best so that there would be something for the community to really appreciate in what he was making for us. And that's definitely something that we can appreciate. And he wanted to tell a cogent and interesting story. So when you come down to it, the games, which became so confusing, so convoluted in the many details, you can be thankful that he came up with a novel series with a single story within them. So some inconsistencies also come along with the revelations that come up in the book series, and there's always something. In the first book, in The Silver Eyes, it was the revelation of William Afton and him being the murderer behind the missing children's incidents and behind Michael's death, and that the childhood friend, Charlie and her friends, called Michael, was the spirit who had come to inhabit Fredbear, or Golden Freddy. And that was a big revelation. But there's also inconsistency in Afton's behavior, both as himself and as Springtrap, that he did not act in the way you would expect a father to act. Probably wouldn't expect him to be obsessed over animatronics, he said in the Silver Eyes that the animatronics and the spirits of the children were at home with him, that they saw him as one of them, so they wouldn't harm him, they would follow his orders. But you wouldn't expect a father to go around murdering children and forcing them to feel at home in certain places that weren't natural to them. And yet, later on, because of sister location, of course, William Afton then narratively became a father to Elizabeth. And yeah, she's in this one. And as to the plot contrivances, and say every time Charlie and her friends survived, despite going up against a psychopathic killer and murdering animatronics, that's a contrivance in its own way, but you need the story and you need the survivors for the story in order to be able to enjoy it. And, of course, the experience of the survival and resource management that the FNAF games are, for the most part, it's not going to translate well into a linear story such as for novels or a movie. It's not, unless you can really tweak it, it's not going to work quite that way.
This closet's got loads of stuff. Loads of files and folders and microphone, but nothing concerning animatronics or Henry or Charlie or William.
But in any case, apart from the inconsistencies that are born of the changes that occurred in the game series, as well as the contrivances that these characters survived, even William surviving is a contrivance of its own. But then, without that, you probably really wouldn't have a very interesting story. And so you have to be glad that you have people along who can experience the occurrences and make it interesting. So you can excuse the contrivances, absolutely, towards a certain extent. So within this book, what do you got? It picks up 6 months after the end of the Twisted Ones, where during a storm, Charlie dies inside of one of the animatronics, leaving John and the others. And since then, John has been trying to figure out what happened with Charlie, as well as everything else. He's become so obsessed with finding out that he can't really manage his normal life. He's having trouble with his job, and he's having trouble socially, because he doesn't know where he fits in anymore, especially after the next day after the storm. This more adult, not Charlie, shows up and inserts herself into the group. And he finds that he can't really accept her as Charlie. After all, he saw Charlie die at the end of the last novel. Not only that, but there are certain things that are off about her, but the others are willing to accept it, and he's really not. So he's trying to figure this whole thing out from the information that he has, which isn't a lot. He even throws in the theory that maybe this is Sammy, Charlie's twin, and that Sammy was a woman all along. He was a girl as opposed to a boy. And this won't be the first time that Scott has played the pronoun game with us, specifically in the Give Cake minigame, where you see it as the victim's avatar looks like a little boy. And then we find out in Pizzeria Simulator, no, this was Henry's daughter. This was Charlie. So, big hints there. But everything in John's investigation, he just keeps running into dead ends. He keeps on running into trouble with the people around him. And he finds that he can't avoid life forever, especially with Jessica dragging him back in and trying to invite him to different things so that he can move on. Hope that he will accept Charlie and move on. But there are still things bothering John about what happened that night and what happened to Charlie and what was actually going on. At the same time, you have this new amusement place that's popped up. It's Circus Baby's Pizza World, Pizzeria, and we all know Circus Baby from Sister Location, but this is the first time that she has shown up to the others. She was, I think, mentioned in the previous book in relation to Henry's suicide, but in this book it's revealed by Charlie, actually, that the animatronic that Henry used was a different one, and it's stored in a closet. That's side of me. Stored in a closet.
This one's got even more clothes. Of course, it's only the other half of my closet.
No one really starts shining a light onto Circus Baby's place until bad things start happening again. And John starts to find out that children are starting to go missing again. Someone attacked Carlton's father shortly after John saw someone in a clown costume, because people were coming in clown costumes for Circus Baby's place's grand opening, but she looked a little off. There are lots of things that are off in this novel. Things aren't quite on, they're not the way they seem, they're not the way that they should be. And while Charlie's friends are curious and trying to investigate with our Charlie, because she's not there, or the Charlie who is not Charlie is more interested in trying to be normal. But nothing is normal in this book, you see, and that's part of the problem. But you have bad things starting to happen, and John wants to get to the bottom of it. So they start to investigate, and Carlton's father gives him some pictures and the hint after he's attacked that it must have a limited range. And so they have to go based on that. And Jessica starts following Circus Baby, which gives her into one of these contrived situations where I don't think she would normally have survived, because she comes face to face with Afton, who has survived again, and he doesn't kill her. You'd expect that if he wanted his plan to go well, he would have kept any witnesses to a minimum. But no, there we have Afton revealed again, and Circus Baby working for him. That's revealed, and doesn't have it in mind to kill the witness. And what's Afton's plan at this time? Well, he's trying to take pieces of himself, actual organs from himself. He has Baby remove them by surgery and try to smush them into this melted wreck of animatronic endoskeletons. And it turns out that these endos are the original gang from Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. And I do have to mention that within this novel series, there are only 3 Fazbear establishments. There's Fredbear's Family Diner in New Harmony. There's Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria from also the first book. I guess there are 4, including the hidden one. There's the underground establishment in the Silver Eyes. And then there is Baby's Pizza World. The location for FNAF 2 and FNAF 4 does not appear in the book series. So what Afton is trying to do in this book is also related to what he was trying to do in the games, at least somewhat. He was doing experiments with Remnant, with Soul, trying to transfer his soul into the endoskeleton wreck. And besides being absolutely insane, I doubt this would have ever worked, because he was just moving organs, removing them from himself and having them pushed in. He did use a syringe to inject Carlton at one point with a substance that's never properly identified. It was probably remnant from the original endoskeletons. And then Carlton goes into this phase where he's hallucinating or dreaming a sequence where he's with the dead children, and specifically he's with Michael under a table, and Michael is trying to pull everyone together. You know, I will put them back together. Those words that have been so important ever since FNAF 4, I believe. And in that sequence, you have some names other than Michael. So of course, this Michael is different from Michael Afton. You get Susie, the blonde girl whose dog died. And of course, she relates to Chica. You have Fritz. You have Cassidy, a girl with brown hair. And of course, I say, this is Scott again playing the pronoun game with us, because the Cassidy from the games may not be a girl. And we know that Cassidy is important because of the survival logbook. The name comes up as the real name of the handbook holder, other than Mike, who also used it before. So you have Michael, Susie, and Fritz, and Cassidy. Alright. You also have a boy in a striped shirt, who is different from Crying Child from the games, mostly because he's playing a different role in the novels. So you have some names for the kids. You never get Henry's or Charlie's last name, so that's a little mystery that's still there, as well as Afton's motives for killing his first victim in the first place. But you do get a motive for everything that he's doing afterwards. See, everything comes back to the title, to the fourth closet, and what was inside. What Henry tells Jen in a letter, which John and Charlie, the real Charlie, find, that Henry says should never fully be opened. See, the biggest revelation within this book, and if you haven't read it, go read it before you listen to this part, because this is a huge thing. This is as big as Charlie being the puppet in the games. Absolutely as big. Because it's about Charlie. The story is absolutely about her, and about what's happened to her and her true nature, and how she could be around after being killed in the Twisted Ones. This is Charlie's story. And it's also Henry's story, and William Afton's story, but mostly everything revolves around Charlie, in sort of the way a YA fiction book revolves around a singular character like that. but in the story, and what's in the closet? That question. And well, why the fourth closet? Why should we check 4 closets? Well, we all know that Scott does things for a reason. He includes details because they are relevant. And so we have to ask, what is in the closet? Why 4? And where have we seen 3 other closets? You might say, well, the surveillance places at Freddy's, the ones where the gang hid, those could be called closets. But there's something more specific that we have seen, that we know are closets from the other previous books. And those are the 3 closets inside Charlie's childhood room. And yes, there were 3. The smallest one was for something about the size of a hand. Then there was a larger one and an even larger one. And out of one of those, when you open the door or turn to crank or something, I don't remember exactly which, it's been a long time, this doll, Ella, comes trundling out on a track holding a tea set. And that's important because Charlie always remembers having this toy that she used to play with. You know, it was like her rabbit Theodore. And so you have this toy that she has in these 3 closets, and most of them are brushed off as storage or for clothes, like a normal person would have, and yet she has this closet where Ella comes out. And then we have this letter of a 4th closet that should never be opened. And what's revealed is that Henry was so distraught in his grief over the death of his child that he made the attempt to build robots at different stages in life and then infuse them, either through programming or directly, with Charlie's soul. Yes, Charlie is the one who died. This is why, in the previous book, Springtrap told Charlie that he didn't choose Sammy. He didn't take Sammy. Springtrap, or Afton, took Charlie. He killed Charlie. Charlie was dead. And Henry made robots to try to make it so that Charlie could live in a way. And he was successful. You know, he had this little toddler or baby Charlie as the first one, this Ella. In the second one, a little bit older, a child. The third one, the Charlie that we all know, the salty teen. And then the 4th Charlie, the adult who's more put together. And this letter from Henry is about those hallucinogenic discs. And it pretty much mentions how Henry put these all around the house to make his Ella series of robots more lifelike, so that it could be like he was living with Charlie still, even though she had been killed. And then there's another letter to Jen that explains that Henry has realized how much damage what he is doing is doing, both to himself and to those around him. And this is especially relevant as John and Charlie have speculated that Charlie's mother left because she couldn't stand what was going on. She left from grief or whatever. The emotional toil was just too much for her. And so she had to leave. And Henry wasn't dealing with his grief. He was running away from it. He was trying to delude himself into believing that everything was still okay. And it wasn't. And it's the perfect demonstration of an unhealthy way to deal with grief. And Henry eventually realized that what he was doing was wrong. And yet he couldn't shut off his robot Charlies anymore. But he still informed his sister Jen that the fourth closet should never be opened. The final stage of Charlie should never be let loose. And yet it eventually was. And then we get in the book with encounters between Charlie and Circus Baby, or the almost said it, but we get through these encounters different memories and different perspectives as to what was going on. And it's revealed that the true identity of the Silver Eyes as well. And we always thought it was Foxy, because Foxy seems to have silverish eyes in the security cameras in FNAF 1. And as well, the endoskeleton was always hanging up and kind of twitchy in the corner of the garage or workshop in Charlie's childhood memories. And who else was twitchy but Foxy? So we kind of discarded it as a fact, or this would be Foxy. It's not. It's Circus Baby. And Circus Baby was very much upset and jealous that Henry was showering all this affection and attention onto the younger stage Ella's, and somehow was aware that everything like this was going on. I guess Henry was still trying to make her function at the time and forgot to switch it off, and over time it became sentient and sapient, and all this resentment started to build. And then there was another person who had resentment, because William Afton became aware of Charlie and all these experiments that Henry was doing, and his success in infusing Charlie into Ella. And Afton in turn became obsessed with experimenting with Remnant to see what he could do with it. And so this gives a motive for everything else that Afton has done, in a way. But we still don't get a motive for why he killed Charlie. But there's this other person too. There's Elizabeth Afton. And she sees her father obsessed with this experiment, and he sees her father obsessed with Circus Baby. She tries to be more like Circus Baby, and she goes to see Circus Baby, who has this kill mode program inside her, and she gets scooped by the claw. And then Elizabeth starts possessing Circus Baby. This is important as well because there are far fewer players in this version of the story. We still have Funtime Freddy, but no hand puppet Bonnie on him. We have a combination of the Mangle and Funtime Foxy who's there as well. And of course we have Circus Baby. But most of the others I don't think we ever see. We see some humanoid crawler robots, but they aren't really described all that well. They could be Balloon Boy or any one of those. They could be the Minarinas or Biddy Babs. But they're not described well enough to actually know which ones they are. They could be all of them. But it's a different cast in this story than what we have in the games, or anywhere else for that matter. In any case, we have the revelation that the real Charlie has been dead all this time, and Henry created these 4 robots for her, but never activated the 4th, or never wanted it to be activated, and yet it was eventually activated, never says by who, and then just like Desk Guy in FNAF World, it's too late to shut her off. Circus baby, that is. And part of this also in the story comes back to those discs again and what they're doing to people and making them see. But you also have Elizabeth again, and she's inside of Baby and trying to please her father. And her father is still doing these experiments, and so she's helping him with them. And at the same time, she's still jealous of Charlie for all the attention that she gets. And through Afton's obsession with her, with these remnant experiments with Soul. And so she's helping Afton continue these tragedies because some more children have been abducted, and of course eventually they would have to keep the whole incident quiet, which would mean killing anyone who's seen them, including Jessica, who gets involved, and also later on Carlton, who's in a situation where he's at death's door basically, and he sees the other kids' souls and tries to help them so that they can save a kid who's going to get killed if they don't step in and stop Afton. And of course, a key difference in the story and how it's done is the resolution. The resolution in the game verse comes from Charlie as well as Michael Afton. The resolution in the game verse comes from Henry as well as Michael Afton working for redemption, both of the souls and for themselves. In the books, because Henry's death hasn't been faked in this instance, the resolution has to come from Charlie and her friends. It has to come from them trying to solve everything, trying to stop Afton and bring some rest to the children's souls. And they have to do this in a way that does grant rest, because we know from in the books that Afton still had the animatronic endoskeletons, and he was using them to take the remnant, the souls, from them and inject them into the Funtime animatronics, which means that those souls never got their happiest day. They never got their rest. And we know from the game, specifically both from the Insanity ending and from the actual ending, that souls become malleable when they are heated to a certain degree, but they also can get destroyed when they are overheated, as we know from the end of the game. So Afton was doing these experiments to find out the limits and tried to put his soul into animatronics so he could be more complete and more like his own creations. But then you have everything else come in, and whether or not this is possible, still taking a chunk at a time out and trying to infuse them into the endoskeleton by smushing them into the parts. Well, you be the judge as to whether you think that would have been possible. Regardless, though, Afton has continually tortured these children's souls, and he would have only done it to more if he had been allowed to continue, and therefore he needed to be stopped. And ultimately, if that required sacrifices, well, there were certain people who were willing to make sacrifices in order to put an end to everything, all of the tragedy. And the same thing was said, the same thing was completely true in the games. Henry and Michael were both willing to become sacrifices to bring everything to a close. And so we can say that the story has ended. The William Afton story, whether or not Five Nights would continue at all, although I think that it comes to a very nice and tidy resolution, at least in the games. This one was a little bit more dirty, but it does bring everything to an end. And in the end, the very end, you get this page. It's one of the few very solid dates that we actually get within the story. Beloved daughter, Charlotte Emily, 1980 to 1983. We always thought that 1983 was a relevant year because of the bite of 83. In FNAF 4, we have this television shot of Fazbear and Friends, copyright 1983. And we thought that was separate from the bite of 87. But this also means that if Charlie was killed in 1983, that also means that at latest, Fredbear's Family Diner was closed in 83, and Freddy's opened around the same time, and then the events of FNAF 4 would have taken place. So it's a very fast series of events to go through, and that would have been very emotionally jarring for Henry because he's still dealing with his daughter's death, and yet Afton is adding to the list of victims around the same time. He's luring these kids to the safe room where he's killing them and putting their bodies into the animatronics. And it's also jarring because you have to realize that the mourning families had nothing to bury because the bodies were never found. They weren't found until way afterwards, if they were found at all. So there are a number of disturbing things, and it is a good thing to see them resolved, to see the conflict and the tragedy come to an end. And I think that's one of the things that the book does well. It tidies up some loose ends. Some things are left mysterious. Some things are left unresolved, such as, like I said, William's original motive. We never find that out. But most things are resolved and tied up rather neatly, and it allows for the opportunity for the surviving characters to move on and continue with their lives. And one person who has done that, I think, is Marla, as she's going to try to become a nurse or a doctor so that she can help people. She's taken the lesson of the past to do something positive for herself and for those around her. And I think that's an important lesson to take. And while it's never shown whether or not John has any concrete plans for the rest of his life, there is hope at the end. And so we can say that the story of Five Nights at Freddy's is resolved well, despite some inconsistencies and despite some conveniences and contrivances on the part of the characters surviving when they probably should not have. We have some mysteries resolved. Now again, this is not the definitive FNAF experience, as according to Scott in his interview, this is a sequence of story that's alternative canon to the games, as well as most likely to the movies, which Scott is working on to make sure that they are well done rather than rushing them out. He's said in the interview with Daco that if he hadn't learned the lessons he learned from making FNAF World and rushing it and trying to rush out a product, that by now we would be 3 movies deep into FNAF and they wouldn't be very good. So he's trying to produce a story that will be good, that people will enjoy, and which will reflect the stories that came out of the games well. And as for the books, the Silver Eyes, the Twisted Ones, the Fourth Closet, they do form an experience, a reading experience, with some new information that we didn't have in the games. So we have a little more that we can integrate into a cogent story as to what may have happened overall. And then when the movies come out, we can maybe have a few more details. And Scott has said the first movie will be based on the first game, second movie on FNAF 2, third movie on FNAF 3, and that will be a trilogy together, just as the games were a trilogy together. And so those will be another experience separate from the games and from the books that have come before. And so here we have another FNAF experience. So in my final word, would I recommend this book? It all depends. You likely won't read this unless you're a fan of FNAF and you're immersed into the lore, because the main reason for reading these books is to get more detail in the lore so that you can find out what happened in the story, and all the story element that started with Phone Guy mentioning the Bite of 87 that changed everything in the way that the establishment was run. So if you're a fan of Five Nights at Freddy's and you want to get more story, I would recommend The Fourth Closet as well as the rest of the series, because you have to take them together in order to get the full story. If you're not a fan, you definitely won't get as much out of the reading experience, but you might still get some enjoyment out of it as a horror series novel, or a novel series. So there is that aspect, and you can try to enjoy that from that aspect. So if you want a copy of The Fourth Closet, you can look it up at your local library or bookstore. That about does it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, you can leave a like, comment below what you thought, subscribe to show your support for my channel, and visit my Patreon. So thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye!